specialized teams. We have the Forensic Utilities Research Team. It's actually the team I work in. It's a team of software developers. We provide forensic software development services to the other groups within our branch and also to our field units. We provide open source data collection services, decryption services, code analysis, this type of thing. We have a network intrusion operations team. These folks are networking experts. They assist with network-based investigations, network intrusions, botnets, any sort of network-based attack. They also participate in, they provide technical support for covert operations, and they also provide some reverse engineering services related to malicious software. Next we have our technical analysis team. These are the folks I mentioned in my example. They actually handle the bulk of the case workload that our branch receives. They specialize in providing support for embedded systems forensics as well as traditional hard disk forensics. We have a validation team. They validate a lot of the software and hardware tools used by our investigators. So things like hard disks, write blockers, data extraction and analysis tools. And finally, we have our program management team. They develop best policies and practices followed by our investigators. They develop we have a training program where investigators get certified, and they sort of develop that curriculum. And they also handle the legal and legislative issues that our program faces. So that's basically it in a nutshell. The tech crime program at the RCMP. Yeah, thank you.
Well done. Thanks, Chris. Tom?
Good morning, folks. How are you? My name is Tom Tallur. I'm retired from the federal government, where I spent 31 years in federal law enforcement. The last position I was in was at NASA, where I built and ran the Computer Crimes Division, and my title was Advanced Technology Programs Executive, and the reason I had that title is because I had wore more hats than running the day-to-day Computer Crimes Division. The thing that I was most concerned about was the exploitation of our novel technologies, nanotech, biotech, intelligent systems, quantum systems, and so on. So the longer your title, the more hats you wear, and the less important you are. I wanted to tell you a little bit about that to kind of very briefly lay out three perspectives here, or a range of perspectives: past, present, future. My concerns right now are totally on the future of forensics in the advanced realm, 30, 40 years out with novel technologies. But I'd like to talk about the past quickly to get there. When I was in the government, when I was at NASA, for example, we had a program set up where we were monitoring all hostile attacks that were coming into us. To give you a statistic, I used at the Office of Management and Budget to justify our budget request one year. In 1 year, we had 65,000 documented hostile attacks by 1,900 groups that we were targeting from 1,900 hostile sites. So there's no correlation between the groups and the sites. It just happens to work out that way. To give you one case in point, one case on one subnetwork at one center involved the compromise of 343 systems in a very sensitive project, which had a trusted host relationship with 5,000 other computers. And at that particular NASA center, we were sustaining 5,000 felonies a day for a long time. Far too many felonies for anybody to investigate. With the size of the group that we had, we could put together 100 or 200 cases and put lots of suspects under those cases and try to collect them up and roll them all up in a group. All these cases were international in nature. 60% of the people we arrested were carrying weapons with them at the time we arrested them. 60% of our cases involved organized crime groups, not La Cosa Nostra type organized crime, but organized cyber groups. 20% back then, we're talking late 1990s now, were foreign host nation state sponsored attacks. Best way I could break it down for you. And the remaining 20 percentile we could put in the other category. Why am I telling you this? Why am I talking about what's happened 20 years ago? This was going on in the 80s, it's going on very heavily in the 90s, and it's gone on this last decade. The government's great at labeling things. We're doing a war on poverty, a war on drugs, a war on this, a war on that. Today the buzzword in the government is it's advanced persistent threat. as for example, Trent and I were talking about before we came up here this morning, this is what we all said was going to happen 20 years ago, but in fact it was happening 20 years ago. The reason nobody saw it is because mostly the government was the victim. The attack vector's changed now with broadband everywhere across the planet. Everybody's the victim. Business is the victim. And we've now arrived at this perfect storm where we have business running the internet instead of the government, and it's driven by money. And so there's a lot of freedom out there for these vast organized conspiracies of groups to do what they do in cyberspace that we were all trying to target back then. So when you hear the words advanced persistent threat, I kind of chuckle to myself because we really had this going on for years. We just have failed to deal with it. My view of everything that's happening here is that we're at the technical level of dealing with all kinds of intricacies for 40-year-old technologies. We just have new variants of them. What I'm interested in is the future because there's so much of the past that we're just running around chasing with like chickens with our heads cut off by having the latest exploit of a particular kernel hack. That's been going on for 40 years. So let's talk about the future briefly and then I'll pass it on to Trent because we're limited on time here. My concern is with nanotechnology, biotechnology, quantum systems, intelligent systems. In my view, if you're not working on that now, you're not relevant. If you're not hooked up or working on not just the theft of these intellectual property systems developing and technologies developing, but if we're not working on hacking and counter-hacking these, we're not relevant. My charter at NASA, when I was there to think about what's going to happen in 2020 when we put this latest fusion motor in this platform with a computer on a chip and a spaceship on a chip out into deep space, who's going to take it out and how can we counter-exploit them? And that's why I have the viewpoint, if we're not working on novel technology exploitation and counter-exploitation now, we're just not relevant. In short, throughout the course of human history, we humans have been the supreme predator on this planet. But this is about to change. Long before this century is over, our technologies are going to prey on us, and we are going to enable the process because the existence of this conference and what I've been talking about for the last 20 years is living proof that we are going to set fields of fire while we run away from the flames toward the next technology we create while we're trying to avoid getting burned up. These themes are encapsulated in a book I'm working on called The Age of Cyberstein, which will come out after the first of the year, and I'm mostly focused on what's going to happen 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Trent? 9 minutes, guys.
Yeah, no, my name's Trent Tima. I'm with the FBI. I have our cyber division. Basically, I run on data. I also run the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force. From the FBI's perspective, there's two different ways to think about it. We have our traditional forensics path out of Quantico. You're doing data at rest. I'm out of our cyber division, so we're conducting investigations into cyber threat, whether it's counterterrorism, counterintelligence, criminal. We look at it from all hazards. The biggest thing that I would bring up that we're seeing is emerging, especially from the focus of this panel is forensics and cyberspace with TCP/IP is looking at that data in motion. Some of the challenges we're going to be looking at is moving away from the forensics, traditionally data at rest, but more into the cloud computing and worldwide because it's the interconnected networks that we're all on. How do we trace it back? We're having real success in working with our counterparts in other agencies around the world and here in the United States. For example, the arrest last week that we were working with earlier this summer and just last week, we worked with the Spanish authorities and the Slovenian authorities where they arrested people responsible for the Mariposa botnet. One of those challenges, and look for the questions coming up, is how we're doing it. A little bit about the NCIJTF. It's a national coordination center that we've set up to work with all of our partners because we're trying to break down those stovepipes of what each agency is seeing across their areas of responsibility so we can connect these dots from a global perspective. And that's all I have.
Amit.
That was great. That was well under 9 minutes, so I get 45.
We're good. 7, 8 minutes.
Amit Yaran. I've never been law enforcement. I think the other panelists clearly smart enough to not want to trust me with a gun or want to see me with a gun. So But I have worked in and around law enforcement and cybercrime cases for more than 15 years now. Most of my experience professionally has come on the incident response side of the house at the Department of Defense Computer Emergency Response Team, also at Homeland Security at the U.S. CERT program, and also in the commercial market with companies like Encase, or Guidance Software with Encase and Access Data, and the FTK product that you're probably familiar with if you've been doing forensics. I'm currently with a company called NetWitness, and we're the largest provider of network-based forensic technologies. In a short synopsis, I would assert that the security market itself, again, not with a law enforcement perspective, but the security market itself is fundamentally broken, where we apply network layer orientation and perimeter orientation, where the threat has really advanced to be content oriented and the exploit is embedded in content more frequently than not. We use signature-based defenses and methods and approaches when the sort of irrefutable evidence at this point is that any threat that really matters is using custom exploits or exploits for which are morphing in ways that our signature-based methods are incapable of adapting to. And so I assert that we have to leverage computer forensic techniques and methodologies that law enforcement and other folks have been doing over the years in order to be effective in defending our systems in incident response. And this is primarily driven by the fact that money's on the line now, so they're going to continue to evolve. When you look at breach analysis on the incident response side of the house, over 90% of it at this point is being driven by organized crime. Almost 60% of it is being driven with custom exploits, and about 8% of it is being detected by the SOC or the internal security team. Most of it is coming from reports from either law enforcement or partner organizations, because our IT security infrastructures are basically incapable of dealing with these types of advanced threats. And the startling concern is about 30% of the breaches at this point also involve some level of sophistication to apply anti-forensic techniques to their exploits. Part of the theme to the panel is to talk about some of the data management challenges. So just to throw some numbers out to the group, at one recording point, we're capturing about 2 to 3 petabytes per day, looking at about 50,000 simultaneous sessions per second, where basically in order to do the application layer analytics, we're extracting out about 30, on average 30 pieces of data to look at per second per session, which translates into about 90 million pieces of metadata per minute. And the way that rolls up is that on a single day, there's more transaction elements to inspect at this single record point than there were electronic financial transactions in the entire US in the year 2008. And that's for an organization that that's one point where they're recording their traffic, and they have over 100 of these types of platforms deployed. So the scale of data, not only capture, but analytics that are necessary in order to do the sort of content and contextual analysis to detect the types of advanced threats that we're dealing with are overwhelming in many ways. But also